Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can be it, you can be it, you can be it. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can be it, you can be it, you can be it. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. It's the high-end theory. The high-end theory. It's the high-end theory. The high-end theory. I remember when I told myself I'ma do this one day. One day. Held on to my dreams really tight and never let them escape.
Hello, Facts family. Welcome to the latest episode of Converse. It's time to elevate our mental universe with another Converse. And now that Dani Katz is here, I guess we can have a conversation. How you doing, Dani?
I'm great, Mo. Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Other than allergies, but doing well. I think this is our third installment.
This is our third, and 3 is the magic number.
Okay, and I think you may have the record. Let me make sure. Facts family, you can correct me on that. I think it may be a tie, but I know you're definitely up there. And before we get started, let's just speak to the Facts family that's in the live chat. We got first in here, Sophisticated Ignorance. Second one is Jared Gambriel. And then finally is Rhapsodic Global. How are you doing? All right, so as you know how it goes, this is just a casual conversation for people that don't know. What we do is we have a insulated conversation between me and you and myself, and then we go to the live chat for any questions. We do that 2 or 3 times, and then we wrap up the conversation. So as you can see on the screen, and I don't know why it has the wrong, why did it do that? Hold on 1 second. Why does it have the wrong thumbnail? That irks me. This is not time. It's not time to walk. No, because that really irks me. That I made a mistake. It's not time to walk away. That was the last episode. This one is the power of propaganda. So before we get started, I would like to introduce the Facts family that may have not seen the previous 2 episodes. Who exactly you are. You're the author of Word Up and also Pop Propaganda. Let me make sure I post your links in the your website in the live chat. So I think you wanted to discuss pop propaganda and its influence on your students. And I guess we can start right there.
Yeah, that's great. And that's actually how you and I were connected, because I had started teaching homeschool high schoolers about propaganda last fall. And I was on Twitter asking Adam Curry's community to recommend resources for teaching teens about propaganda. And a bunch of people were like, talk to Mo, which is great because that's how we got connected. And then it was from spending 12 weeks teaching teenagers about propaganda that I was inspired to bust out this illustrated guide, because there wasn't really anything for them. I tried using the Bernays, but it was a little dense and not super up to date. And now I'm teaching homeschoolers about how language creates reality. And I notice how they always, not always, but a lot of the time they want to talk about propaganda. They want to talk about all the media that's being shoved down their throat and all the propaganda that they're noticing. And it's just so inspiring that they're clued into it.
And not only can people read your books, you also have a very interesting Instagram follow. I always like the quotes that you post, and maybe just to warm up a little bit, I got a couple of your quotes that you post on your Instagram. And for folks that want to follow you, your link is also in the live chat as well. So you can follow her at something Dani. You just want to get into a couple of these before we jump off into the heavy stuff?
Yes, I'm happy to. Heads up, I'm currently on an 11-day Instagram break in an attempt to reset the algorithm.
Okay.
The shadow banning has been really intense. So for anyone who's inspired to follow me at something.Dani, know that I will be back to posting daily as of Thursday.
So just before we get into this quote, would you say that shadow banning is like a anti-propaganda or a defensive form of propaganda?
Well, it's straight up censorship, which is
Okay.
certainly a type of propaganda. So it's just a way of silencing the dissenters or silencing people who are sharing facts and information that counters, the dominant narrative, their propaganda, which is it for me. It seems so obvious because if if the dominant narrative was true, then it wouldn't have to censor. They wouldn't have to lie. They wouldn't have to coerce. They could just rest in the beauty of their so-called truth. Alas, that's not really how it's going. So I do a podcast with Emily Moyer, which is a bit similar to what you and Adam do, except
Okay.
we're tackling different ops and different realms of propaganda, and that seems to get me censored more than anything. Plus I wrote, I don't know if I can say the name of the movie here without getting us in trouble, but
Okay.
Plandemic part 2. And so that has me that has the thought police not really happy with giving my stuff that much attention.
And I think that's a great segue into the quote I have on the screen. It says, "Those who fear the facts will forever try to discredit the fact finders." That goes hand in hand with shadow banning. And just stop me. I just want to let people know what they can find on your Instagram. And I think these are also in the book as well. Or is this something separate that you kind of do?
This is separate. These are things that I just share on the daily. And all of my quotes speak to critical thinking, propaganda, empowerment, anything to uplift and inspire people so that we can get to the other side of this really bizarre wormhole we're all enduring together.
And then another one is from Buddha. It says, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." So I guess that's why they fear propaganda, right? Because people find ideas, and then it sparks thought, and then thought sparks change, right? Would you agree with that statement?
I definitely would agree. And this quote speaks a lot to my quantum languaging work. And that's the first book I wrote, Word Up, Little Languaging Hacks for Big Change, which is that every single word we think and speak and write programs our subconscious mind and programs our reality. So the way that propaganda works is that, there's this whole demoralization thing, or there's the, the illusion of the divide, or even just like advertising that wants to tell us that we're not enough, or we're too much, or we're too fat, too short, too poor, too whatever. And all of these things go into our subconscious mind, and then that shapes our identity, our lens of perception, how we move through the world, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. And then finally, we have all wars is a symptom of man's failure as a thinking animal. I took this quote and I kind of shaped, just a journey down a small rabbit hole. Because when we spoke via email, you said you want to bring up about the pop propaganda of your book and the propaganda and the interests of young people. And you also brought up the Smith-Mundt Act.
Right.
And so I think by the end of this show or this conversation, we will have a understanding kind of what's going on in geopolitical politics, geopolitical media and what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and with Putin. And as these are the things, these are the tricks that we have to use to get around the censorship, to get around the anti-propaganda. We have to come up with these little catchphrases like Vaseline is the one we use around here for the jab. And then also, I just call him Putin because definitely they are listening and they are censoring. With that said, anything else? Oh, one more thing I want to say is this is why this product that I create is important, because it brings together people that I've met along this journey as yourself. And I think conversation is the most powerful weapon. When when you can sit down and have a fruitful conversation with someone, it cuts through the media narrative, and you can get seek first to understand, and then to be understood, which is one of the 7 habits that I practice. So anything you would like to add to that before we jump off into the beginning of the things that I put together today?
No, that's what I love about your show. That's what keeps me coming back, and that's why I'm excited to dive into this conversation today, for sure.
Okay. So when you brought up the interest of young people and their interest in propaganda, it made me think about memes, which I think is the most, I've said this repeatedly, that I think memes are one of the most powerful propaganda tools, and it's nothing new as we're going to examine. So do you cover that in your book? Or do you cover this with your class?
I cover it with my students in class, for sure. And actually their final project was they were all assigned to create their own propaganda campaigns. And it just warmed my heart to see the memes that they created. They were instructed to pick any body part and convince the public to give this body part away. And what they did with their memes was pure genius. It was great.
And I'm sure that has something to do with what's going on in the media, but we won't go down that rabbit hole today, or I would assume so. But this is an article from Al Jazeera talking about the power of memes. And this is an older article. I think this was around the time of the 2012 election. And you can see Mitt Romney's on the slide. You're probably wondering why, or the Facts family's probably wondering why. And this is when he brought up the binders of women comment. Do you remember that comment? And
I don't.
Well, he was in a debate with Obama, and they were like, "What? Oh, what do you do for women?" And whatever. You know, saying like, "What is your interest?" Kind of painting him as a chauvinist or not interested in women's rights. And what he said was, "I have a binder full of women," and they shaped that in a way through memes to show that his lack of sensitivity towards women. Right. So this, like I said, this was the article here, and it says the subtitle says, although memes are a useful way to parody politics, they often lose track of what's at stake. Would you like to speak to that secondary headline, or anything that you may see on the screen, units of culture, that kind of thing, or just memes in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think memes, they're powerful in terms of propaganda mechanisms because they combine visuals, symbols, colors with, short text or sometimes no text at all. And propaganda is really dependent upon emotions, like how quickly can it generate an emotional reaction. And memes are a great way of doing that in combining symbols and images with words. Of course, they lose track of what's at stake. Of course, they're reductive. But I think that's one of the biggest problems with the current media sphere, is that so much of it is reductive and reduced to these little sound bites. I mean, just this sort of antiquated practice of political debate is something I'm so excited for us to evolve past, because it doesn't, I'm not going to vote for a leader because he can cling to one side and render himself right. To me, leadership is listening, hearing what all the interests are and seeing how well my leader can collaborate and converse in a diplomatic way. So debate itself, just given that that's what's inspiring this particular piece that we're talking about, is itself reductive and old school and, steeped in a sort of like polarized win-lose, egoic, who can be right, that I think is part of the problem that we're still living out.
Okay. And it's funny you talk about, the reductive nature of news. I think it's only going to get worse, because I think the way the internet works, maybe Twitter was a contribute to this phenomenon a lot when it reduced language down to 140 characters. I think it's 280 now, if I'm not mistaken. But when we got to that point where you had to get out of maybe a very nuanced thought in 140 characters. It forced people to boil it down. I personally believe that we're going to see more of this as we've seen with the recent Supreme Court hearings. I think the whole approach, and I spoke about this on Hotep Jesus, my guest spot on his show, that I think that whole song and dance that happened was to create memes. And one of the memes that came out of that was she couldn't define a woman. I mean, that's those 3 days. I mean, it was other one talking about the whole pedo thing. Easy YouTube. I'm just easy. But and that's like, we have to do this because we know the eye is watching, Big Brother is watching, but
Right.
we still gonna have this conversation. But I think that was the point of it, to boil it down to 2 or 3 main points. One, she was friendly on maps, and then she couldn't define a woman. And I think that was the whole point of the question and answer process. Would you, did you have any point on that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And even back in the day, you know, because I come from a hard news background.
Mm-hmm.
So even back in the day, you know, news was still whittled down to sound bites and like gotchas. And it has gotten, I would say, probably, I'm guessing, 1,000,000 times worse. And I think you're right. We're only going downhill because people's attention spans have been chipped away. I read a citation a couple years ago, so it's probably gotten even worse, that the average human attention span is now shorter than that of a goldfish, which is 7.
And that's a meme in itself. You see, like,
Sure.
it's continue, but I'm just saying that's where we got. This is where we've arrived.
Yeah, I mean, the extent of the social engineering that has been deployed on the human species and where we're at now, it's really startling because, you know, I see it with my students. They're not used to reading long passages. They do have shorter attention spans, adults as well. So as far as having the bandwidth, the ability, the focus, you know, and the willingness to really dive in to an issue, a bill, a policy, you know, a circumstance in the world, and learn about both sides and dive deeper into the history, you know, very few people are willing to do that. It's all about like sound bites and gotchas. And it's not really an effective means of up-leveling our country and our species. Like, it's not working for us. It's working for the social engineers who don't have our best interests in mind. And that's really my aim in terms of like my propaganda book, and what I'm teaching is helping people understand that the people shaping our minds and shaping our discourse don't have our best interests in mind. So it's really on us to take the reins and steer us in a different direction.
Okay, you made 3 points there. One, I want to just you inspired 3 thoughts. One, the purpose of this show or this conversation or this example, I mean, however you look at it, is to show an example of how people can sit down and have a conversation. To one party is listening while the other is speaking. And then hopefully that's a good example when people are engaging with people in their daily lives. They can see what works. 2, you brought up going back to the reductive nature of language. We've even gone down to reducing words, right? I mean, like even words themselves, we chop them off.
I know. It's frustrating.
So, what'd you say? You broke up a little bit.
I said it's so frustrating. It's a pet peeve of mine, like that people can't even be bothered to finish a word, but they have to truncate it.
Yes. And 3, I want to ask this question. Do you think we're in an information war? And the reason why I asked that question is this the time and place for the nuanced conversation, or is it win the war and then we'll go back to diplomacy and fruitful long form conversations?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think it's yes and yes. We are absolutely in an information war. And it's interesting, you know, hearing people talk about, is World War III coming? We're already in it. Like it's been happening for years. We are absolutely in an information war, and I don't think there's any way to quote unquote win the information war except to expand into more nuanced conversations. I don't think a binary polarized my side is better than your side is any sort of victory, because if we're maintaining the illusion of sides, then we're all losing. And we're missing the point of what's going on, which is the oligarchs versus the people, all the people.
And it's funny that you bring up World War III, because the next slide I have is to prove that memes are nothing new. Before I go there, would you like to speak on the newness, the oldness, and what your thoughts are of how long memes have existed before I reveal this next slide?
Well, I feel like political cartoons are the oldest memes, but because, our current generation isn't used to reading newspapers or reading things in print. Now we have memes that have taken their place. But I know in terms of, what was going on in World War II, political cartoons were a huge part of propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Are you cheating off my test?
Mind melting with you, Mo.
The reason why I say that is Washington Post right here. Why is propaganda more dangerous in the digital age? And they bring up the point. Let me zoom it in here on my screen. And it says today propaganda posters have been replaced by digital visuals, such as the meme, that are easily produced, mass disseminated, and politically poignant. It says once the potential to do even greater good, with the potential to do even greater damage to American politics and society than propaganda posters did a century ago. And they have on the screen, for people that are listening and not looking, they have the I Want You U.S. Army sign. And it goes on to say, Flag, a veteran artist and contributor to publications such as Life magazine, ended up creating almost 50 designs. So he's an OG meme maker. Almost 50 designs on behalf of the Committee of Public Information, which I think that's going to be a little foreshadowing there as we continue this conversation. The U.S. propaganda and intelligence arm by the end of World War I. So this is proof that memes are nothing new.
But also notice the inversion, which is inversions are like a primary tactic of the propagandists. So the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, who also owns Amazon, and they're flipping it as though propaganda is hurting like the government and the government's agenda. And now what I've seen, more so than ever, is these propaganda arms coming out against the truth tellers and accusing the truth tellers of being propagandists, and everything's completely upside down. I call it clown, it's upside down clown world.
It's inverted. We live in an inverted world. We definitely live in an inverted world and it's scary because when you hear something from the mainstream media, you tend first not to believe it. I mean, just speaking for myself, and have to prove that it's true. And that's a very dangerous state to live in. So just to keep the conversation moving, that now we see that memes are nothing new and they've been around for ages, even going farther back than the World War One, and you can see American had its own propaganda wing, being the Committee on Public Information. I have this video from Daniel Denton. Are you familiar with? I'm sure you are. But do you want? If you are, would you like to say you're not?
No, please.
Okay, great. So this is I got her stumped her. No, I'm just messing with you. So we're gonna get in this. Stop me anytime throughout the video. But the video talks about how cultural evolution. Let me see. It's not showing the full. Well, we'll get into it. So he's speaking on memes and how memes are nothing new. All right, here we go.
Richard Dawkins coined the term meme in his 1976 book,
I had to say this, fair use.
Selfish Gene. And what he proposed was that human culture was composed, at least in part, of elements, units, that were like genes in that they were copied and copied and copied and copied and copied. And it was the differential copying, the differential replication of these items, these memes, that accounted for the excellent design of so much in human culture. This is a very repugnant and offensive idea to many people, especially in the humanities. They wanted to hang on to the idea of the godlike genius creator who, out of sheer conscious, brilliant comprehension, makes all these wonderful things, whether they're poems or bridges or whatever. He was saying, in effect, well, yes, people do make amazing things, but if you look at the projects in detail, you see that they couldn't do that if they hadn't filled their head with all these informational things, which are like genes, which are also information. But they're not passed down through the germline. They're not passed down through the sperm and the egg. You don't get them with your genes. You get them from the ambient culture, from your parents, from your peers, from the society in which you're raised. It requires perception.
All right, so you want to speak to that, or what did you take away from that?
I mean, what I was getting from that was the concept of the morphogenetic field that connects all humans, and that sort of the science behind the otherwise like kumbaya phrase, we are one. And we all like to think that we're these individualized, super special snowflakes with our own super special, brilliant ideas, when the fact of the matter is that we're all connected through one singular field of consciousness. And whatever, like, we're all programming that field of consciousness, which is the danger of the mass media and how much power they have, because all of that programming is going into our minds. And even those of us who aren't seeing it directly, you know, maybe we're not watching those shows or watching those movies or reading those websites, but because we're connected, it's still seeping in and informing our worldview and our thoughts, which is why, like, the more of us who free ourselves from these fictional constructs, from, you know, from the fake news and the propaganda and the cultural engineering, and are dealing in the realms of truth, then we get to program the morphogenetic field with those ideas, right? With solutions and how functional and wonderful and sustainable our culture can be. And then those ideas can trickle down. And I think that's the information war, is like who's influencing the most people. And that's, you know, that's right now why I think so many of us are being censored, because they're doing everything they can to like step on the truth and shove it down the drain so that they can continue to have the control that they have had.
And as I have on the screen for people that are listening and not watching, I go back to your Buddha quote. And it says, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. And I don't think, the way I interpret this now from the perspective of how you laid it out, is that I am a result of what you've thought. Not only my own thoughts, but the shared thoughts that's shared throughout society. So it makes it's just like, that's why they want, like, no, these ideas can't get out, because once they get out, it's like Pandora's box, basically.
Totally. And it's, you know, I know we talked about this before the show, kind of behind the scenes, but what's organically coming up is your two third rail series, and, you know, our unique points of view on it, and just, you know, what it's been like having been told consistently throughout my whole life that like Jews are the reason why everything's wrong in the world, and Jews are evil and Jews are bad, and how like that kind of overarching thought seeping into collective consciousness doesn't feel that great.
Right. And then, but it also stymies conversation, because once you hear these triggers, or we call them third rails, once you touch the third rail, it kind of just nukes the whole conversation. Because, and maybe you can define what this is when someone hits a sensitive spot, not you per se, but when someone hits a sensitive spot, like for me, or it could possibly be for me, or a black person, if they hear the word black in a sentence, once they hear that, it puts them in a different place when they're listening, or for a Jewish person or a Muslim person or whatever else. Once they hear this term, it automatically kind of like shuts down or goes into like a safe mode, I would call it. Like our brain goes into a safe mode kind of a function. Would you
Yeah, I think
what is that? What is that exactly?
I think it's epigenetic programming, from
Okay.
like however many generations of trauma our bloodlines have endured. I think it triggers like a fight or flight or shut down response. I mean, I loved your Third Rail series,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that you went there. And I was, as you know, because I was messaging you, like I had triggers.
Real time. Yeah, I could tell like where you were at in the episode by your like and then like, oh, okay. And then and then, okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it was kind of cool getting your real time response as you were listening to it. But continue on.
I appreciated your patience with me because I'd like have a little freak out, message you, then I'd keep listening and it'd be like, oh, okay, he came back around. But yeah, I think it's just so deeply programmed in us, from all the generations of whatever it is that we've gone through. And it is interesting how you hear these, it's just like these trigger words that shut down the conversation. And, I've been lobbying you behind the scenes to do a third installation about Khazaria and like what's really going on with that story. And it's interesting among Jews how any mention of Khazaria will immediately shut down, my Jewish friends of like, that's anti-Semitic. We can't talk about it. And it's like, but we have to, if there's anything that I quote unquote can't talk about because of cultural stigma, then I'm pretty sure we need to talk about it.
And the way I did the Third Rail episode in the Lost Tapes was I'm peeling the onion, right? And it's like you have to take one layer off and then come back later once that's, once people can digest it, understand it, then I'll go deeper. But if you go straight there, you're just like this is why I'm a big advocate of retitling reparations to atonement. Because that word has been so loaded, if you go straight there, people shut down and people can't hear you. And I've got so much feedback from people that may have been, anti-reparations or either just like, we're past that. I won't even say anti because that's not a good word. But once they looked at it through the atonement lens, they, oh, now I get what you're saying. But they were so triggered by the term reparations itself and not the idea that they couldn't even get to what was being said. So we have to go to the Facts family now. They're going to have my hide. But before we do, I want to just talk about this one meme that has jumped off the internet. And I think this is maybe the future of memes themselves. And this is, I did that. The Joe Biden stickers that are being placed on gas pumps.
Yeah,
I'm thinking we're starting to see digital memes jump out of the metaverse and go into the quote unquote real world. Have you seen these?
I have seen them and I love them, and it's for full circle, like you and I are of the generation, that predates the internet. So this is how it used to be. This is how political action used to be done. And I think this is the way that we are going to flip it because, the controls on the digital sphere, luckily they haven't, impeded what you're doing that much. But for me, it's been really tough to get my message out. So I love to see people going back to analog and stickering and putting up flyers. I think that's the best way that people can be taking action right now where they're not being, squelched by big tech and AI and algorithms.
So, yeah, and I think, like you said, we're going back to bumper stickers. I think this is why the popularity of the T-shirt came about, because you can make a statement in the real world and kind of, pepper people with it. So, but like I said, I got to go to the Facts family now, go to the questions. I have a few that I had already started, and please, Facts family, get your questions in over the next 5 minutes or so. And yeah, so we got Iggy. He said, I used to be annoyed about the lack of capitalization and punctuation in chat messages. I still try to do it, but on these phones, it's more difficult to keep doing it, so I miss it sometimes. Have you addressed punctuation, capitalization in your works?
Well, I haven't addressed it in terms of what I teach, and I address it with who's ever texting and messaging me all the time. I feel like I'm a custodian of language. And I don't like seeing language being disrespected to the extent that it is. So when people truncate words with me, I'll play dumb and just say, I don't know what you're referring to. I'm guiding people to continue to honor the language and use it respectfully. It's probably annoying for my friends.
All right, next we have Tyler B. He said, first meme maker was Martin Luther. And I'm thinking he's talking about I forget the document that he nailed to the door, but that would be similar to the Joe Biden gas pump stickers. Like, here, he nailed it to, and my memory escapes me for what that document was called. And he also comes back, he said, Martin Luther political cartoons were more famous than his 97 and 98, thank you, and 98 thesis, however many it was. I was not aware of his cartoons. Were you?
I wasn't, but it's interesting because I was having a conversation with a friend and colleague yesterday about how it's going to be through cartoons and humor that we're going to get on top of this. And he was sharing a story about these two political cartoonists during the Nazi regime who were actually... they were liberated from the camps because their work was too dangerous to have them in. They needed them just like out of the whole mix because it was riling up the prisoners in a way that wasn't helpful to the oppressors. Okay.
And then we have Gravy Wagon. He just said, woohoo, Mo Sunday. I can now tell everyone I was at church today. And I saw a couple of church references in there. And I guess you could say that. I saw somebody say with 2 or 3 gather, saying, so yeah, I mean, I can see that. And Gravy Wagon came back and said the 95 thesis. Thank you. Facts Family is one of the most intelligent. I got plenty of people saying 95 thesis, 95 thesis. Sophisticated said, he said, I totally disagreed. We didn't even speak the same English. The George Washington era spoke language, evolve, humans don't. Okay, so he's saying that I'm just from what I'm understanding what he's saying is that when you try to correct language or uphold the standards of language, it may be seen as controlling. Could you see that? Could you
totally
first to understand him? And
absolutely. I absolutely see it as controlling, and it very well may be me being stuck in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of conversations about the pronoun thing, and I get very irked when pronouns that have existing definitions that mean plural are used to reference singular, because I think it fragments and confuses. And I think any system of organization, which language is, should make things easier to understand. And I've also seen plenty of talks about the evolution of language that have me wondering if I'm just not like some old fuddy-duddy who's clinging to something that is time to evolve. So I can absolutely see sophisticated ignorance's point.
And have the people listening that under a certain age may not even know what a fuddy-duddy is. So then maybe this is the point of evolving language.
Yeah.
But I can see where it can be divisive and even a form of supremacy in the fact that, like, when people say, I say ask. Like, and when I'm in just normal vernacular, it'll come out like ask. Like the actual tool that you cut wood with.
Right.
And people judge you for some reason, like you're not intelligent or, so I can understand. This is where I stand on it. Definition of words. Yes. We need to stay true to definitions of words, because when we change them, then when you look backwards, it changes the meaning of what was said. But when people are word police to show a level of intelligence or compliance to the social norms or wherever you're at, because I always find it like Southern American grammar that's typically used by quote unquote black people is seen as culturalist, but we appreciate pidgin language. It's like, because you have whole news broadcasts abroad across the world is done in pidgin, if I'm saying that correctly. So I just find that fascinating, like, or how corporations can take that Southern vernacular, like who dat. You know, the Saints football team in New Orleans have taken it and branded it in their team. But if you were to say that in a job interview, people look at you like you were an idiot.
It's true. It's something that I think we are evolving out of, this kind of like elitism in terms of dialect. And because obviously you and I are on the same page with definitions, and I speak like a Valley girl. I am a Valley girl. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley in the 80s, so I've gotten a lot of grief about that. And I think that we're moving into a space, and I think this is the beauty of the internet, where you have independent content creators who are delivering valuable content, but they're not mimicking that sort of narrow, singular, homogenized way of delivering information. And I think that's opening up space, for me to speak like a Valley girl, or for you to speak like someone from the South. And I think that's more inclusive. Like, I'm into that.
Yeah, and it's not fair to prejudge somebody by the way they use the way they use English, because it's part of who they are. And it irks me, especially being a quote unquote black man from the South. Even when people hear my accent, and you see this often in the news, when they get a Southern person to speak, it's like, oh yeah, he's an idiot. And it's like, wow, you just jumped to that conclusion, huh? So I mean, maybe I'm a little sensitive to it, but all right, let's get back. All right, Fat Film, we're gonna get into the second segment of the conversation, and with this, we're gonna jump into the Smith-Mundt Act. And would you like to guide us through this? Because it's something that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think it's something that's really important for us to be aware of. I have a new segment, podcast series that I do called Spot the Propaganda. And I get a lot of the material from Netflix. And Obama has a $50 million production deal with Netflix, which is heavily funded by BlackRock, Vanguard, George Soros, like the usual players. And It was under Obama's administration that the Smith-Mundt Act was repealed. So the Smith-Mundt Act made it illegal for our government to use propaganda against its own people. And I don't understand how they could have framed this as being positive for the American people in repealing it. And while of course our government was using propaganda against us before the Smith-Mundt Act was repealed, I think it's clear we've seen a massive exponential uptick since 2013, and this happened under Obama. And so I think it's important for people to realize, because you have, that horrible movie Don't Look Up was nominated for an Academy Award, and that was a Netflix production, and that was pure, unadulterated propaganda. So in terms of just helping people understand that the powers that were don't have our best interests in mind and are not serving our well-being, I think it's important for people to clue in to what happened with the Smith-Mundt Act, and that being like an absolute atrocity that was pulled on the American people under Obama.
And the fact, I just want to go on a little tangent about Netflix itself, because you bring up the propagandistic nature of Netflix, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but they actually changed the cover art based on what race they think you are.
What?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Because I'll notice, with our Netflix, I guess we have the black Netflix. Every show, the cover art, I have the black person in the show on it. And I was telling my wife, we were having this conversation last night, and we were just going through, and I was showing look, and then you'll watch the trailer, no black people in it, but the art, black people on it. The show might have one black person in the show that has a very small part, but they're on the cover art. And I'm like, that's not usually how cover art works. Usually cover art is representative of what the show is about, but no.
I had no idea. That it's so appalling to me. And especially Like, I was a child of the 70s, you know, so we all watched Sanford and Son. We all watched The Jeffersons. We all loved The Cosby Show. None of that was marketed just for Black people. And the fact that they're capitalizing upon this and now marketing in this way, it's so low vibe and divisive and gross to me.
And I think the way they do it is look at what you've previously watched. And I'm sure they have, like, okay, he watches a lot of Hispanic stuff. All right, who's the Hispanic people in this maybe like cooking show? All right, we have artwork for them. Because I noticed, I was like, hold on, all the people on my Netflix are Black. You know what I'm saying? Like, as I go through this, and I don't remember, you know, and it'll be like a cooking show or something like with 12 contestants. And they'll have the 2 Black people on the cover art of it. And I'm like, hold on, they didn't even play a prominent role in that show. And I just noticed it's like Black character, Black character, Black character. And I'm like, holy crap. You know, so this is just something I noticed, and I just want to let people know this is, yeah, like Mike said, they're digging deep.
Yep.
So now I want to jump into how what you brought up was received. And I have PolitiFact here.
Oh, yeah.
We got to be careful with that. That might be the name of their website, might even be fake news, but
Probably.
they have a Facebook post here says President Barack Obama made it legal, quotes, for the media to, end quotes, purposely lie. And I'm always careful when people, preference the word lie or truth with a word like purposely.
Yep.
Or, you know, they add these little words to it. But continuing on, purposely lied to the public when he quietly, in quotes, signed into law H.R. 43 in 2012. So they did this, and then they came back and said, no, Obama didn't make it legal for the media outlets to, quote, purposely lie. So if you unpurposely lie, that's fine. But if you purposely lie, oh, that's a no-go.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead. Jump in anytime.
Well, that's one of the fact checkers, and I'm using quote marks with fact checkers because PolitiFact, owned by the Poynter Institute, funded by the Gates Foundation and Open Society and the Clintons, like the people who work there don't have degrees in journalism. Like it's all, the whole sham of fact checkers is something for people to be aware of. But this is one of the main things they do is they'll throw like an erroneous adjective or adverb in, and then they'll debunk the whole thing because no, the person didn't run to, you know, buy child pornography. They walked slowly. So then the whole thing is faked because of just one dumb little word.
And it's a tactic, but the counter tactic is now, and this is the beautiful thing about memes, that unknowingly what they did was level the playing field. Because you and I are just as powerful as CNN with our social media and what we tweet and like and quote and using memes, because memes are one method you can get around the algorithm with. Because it's not smart enough yet to understand sarcasm and seeing how it's being used. So going to the fact check now, even when they come out and fact check something, it's kind of like an acknowledgement that they're lying. Right. This is the understanding, like, oh yeah, well, when they came out fact checked, it's obviously a lie. So it's I know this is a cliche, but what a wonderful time to be alive. Yeah. Because I was explaining to someone, I think it was Grump. You know what I'm saying? One of my good friends is, and a friend of the channel as well, that when I was young, and this is at my grandmother's house, she didn't have cable. So you only had CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS. And this was like pre-Fox. So you had those 4 channels. You had a couple of radio stations, the local newspaper, and then you could get the one like called the Charlotte Observer. So Charlotte was the closest big city to us. So that was like, what, 8 forms of communication or information that you would get, and the big four were pretty much aligned: PBS, CBS, NBC, and ABC. All of them was pretty much aligned. They had different tilts and tints to it, but they were pretty much aligned. Now you compare that to now, where you have thousands of television channels, when you factor in all the streaming platforms and everything else, social media, blogs, YouTube channels. I just don't think. I think they let they open Pandora's box, and I don't think they know how to get it back in.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, right now, the censorship and shadow banning I'm enduring, has me a little bit down on the six giant corporations that are running these things. And you're still out there, Adam's still out there. Like, there are plenty of independent creators who are slipping through the cracks. And that's, there are moments where I definitely feel hopeless about the situation. I'm sure anyone who's paying attention has those moments. But then I remember, they didn't have the internet before. Like, we have that on our side. We get to educate ourselves. We get to educate other people. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it continues to unfold. Okay.
So with that said, I found this, and I was doing my research on the Smith-Mundt Act and HR 4310. I found this interesting clip from Max Rose. And for people that don't know, Max Rose, he was a House of Representative of New York, I think Staten Island, 11th district. And in this, I think it was called, let me see what the name of the video is. And I get all my sources pretty much from YouTube, because one, YouTube can't, get dirty with me, because I'm like, it's on your platform. So, what I'm saying? So like, get mad at the person that posted. But this was the markup of HR 5736, 5780, 5802, 5804, and others, right? And in that, they were discussing what was it? I just had it on the screen. Let me go back. It was 4310. So Max Rose, I'm going to play a video, and it's going to be and this was, I think, I want to say, this was Obama this was when they were doing the voting on it. So this was around that time, I think. Was that 2014, 15, I believe? When they passed this bill?
I thought it passed 2013, but
2013. I mean, I'm just saying it was pre-Orange Man, pre-45. It was pre-45 Savage, pre-Pootie Tang. Yeah. So I just want to get this interesting clip out of what he had to talk about.
And Chair recognized gentleman from Staten Island, Mr. Rose.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your extraordinary leadership and generosity. Mr. Richmond, there's nothing I want to thank you for. Just thank you for that. The upsurge in white supremacist extremist attacks in the United States puts us all at extraordinary risk, and there's increased evidence that this is linked to a transnational movement. In so many ways, the threat that we face from white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, is analogous to the threat that we face from jihadist terrorism. By one estimate, for example, if we consider the Azov battalion in Ukraine, 17,000 individuals from 50 countries have traveled to battlefields in Ukraine to train and fight with this neo-Nazi organization.
Did you just hear that?
Yep.
He's admitting that people were going to Ukraine at the time when they were voting on this bill to go train with white supremacists. And this was an issue. And it's a little foreshadowing to what we're going to talk about in the third block, just so you can switch gears in your mind, so we can talk about the real propaganda that's going on in real time. Yep. But he's going to lay this all out just for the people that's listening.
Also notice the red Kabbalah bracelet on his wrist.
Yeah, that too.
Yep.
That too. Let's continue on.
And to date, we are not doing nearly enough to analyze this threat and disseminate that information down to local law enforcement. Last month, federal authorities arrested a Canadian national, a recruiter for a white violent supremacist group, as he was planning violence at a gun rights rally in Richmond, Virginia. In accordance with this, my subcommittee has drilled down on the threats posed by these extremists, to include anti-Semitic extremists at home and abroad. One theme that has emerged has led us to this bill, the Transnational White Supremacist Extremist Review Act, which seeks to equip law enforcement officials with this information by directing DHS to develop and disseminate a terrorist threat assessment of foreign violent white supremacist extremist groups. I believe.
So now this doesn't this doesn't bode well with the narratives now, does it? Like I said, we don't want to get too deep into it. I got a whole block to talk about, so people stay around. We're going to go to the Facts Family questions, but when you say this now, when they fact check you, it's like, no, there's no Nazis in the Ukraine. What are you talking about? Or that kind of thing. But we have this man here. He served in the military. He was Bronze Star, Purple Heart. So I take him at his word that, he's not some kind of propagandist. And it's amazing that they're discussing this in the actual bill conversation. So anything you want to say about this?
No, I mean, let's see where we go in the third part as far as the Ukraine, because that whole thing is just
crazy.
It's such a psyop that's happening on so many different levels. But yeah, apparently his handlers weren't on him hard enough back then.
Well, I don't know. I think they were looking for any boogeymans to set up the narrative.
Totally.
To come after quote unquote white supremacists in America so they could label them with the T word. And we don't say that word around here because I think that's the most dangerous word in the English language. Because what it does is that all terrorist does is make you an instant slave. And I was having this conversation with somebody and they looked at me like when I said it, I was like, what the 13th Amendment, you become a slave when you become convicted of a crime, right? Exactly. You have to go through, due process, have your day in court. Once you have your day in court, you're found guilty, then you lose your rights and you basically become a slave to the state. I mean, that's how it's read. The 13th Amendment says you lose all rights and can be worked for pennies on an hour. So one reason why I say the T word is basically a straight jump to slavery is they don't have to use any due process. You automatically lose all your rights when they label you with that word.
Well, and it's also interesting because this was like so close to 9/11 when the T word became such a popular word, and they used that as an excuse to rescind so many of our rights and put us in a constant state of emergency. So they were, yeah, you're right. They were really playing up that word and that narrative back then.
Mm-hmm. To make saying what it wanted to become a domestic T word, because that's a hard jump for them to make. Is to go from, brown people across seas in the desert. Okay, yeah, I can see them being T words. That's easy. But for American citizens to be labeled that, they had to push and push and push. And this is why they had to have that connective tissue between Ukraine, white supremacists or Nazis, and the people that quote unquote train with them there. So let's finish up with this clip. I'm going to go to the Facts family. They address their questions, comments, and then we'll come back and talk about Ukraine and Russia on the backside, okay?
Cool.
All right.
That the threat posed by these groups and their nexus to domestic activity is one of the major challenges we face in terms of homeland security. I thank my colleagues across the aisle for their partnership in this bill, and of course, our extraordinary staff for their work on this and leadership. Thank you again, Chairman.
All right, so that was the Committee of Homeland Security. Now we're going to the Facts family questions. Starting off with Sophisticated again. He's been active, always very active in the chat. He said, bro, what I'm saying is the language change and we can't stop. He said, I'm saying language change and we can't stop it. If that was the case, we would still be talking Old English and or even the Romans spoke. Okay. I think he's going back to the original conversation. Gravy Wagon says language is always based on who you are speaking to. And that's true as well. Because when we're using scientific terms, if me and you are having a conversation, it's certain things I could say that it's highly likely you know what I mean when I say it. Like when we bring up certain names, propagandists, that kind of thing. It's not an explanation. And I might even drop the first name, just say the last name, that kind of thing. So that's a great point. And you could just chime in any of these comments.
Yeah, I think it's also important because it is an information war, and that language, it can be used to empower and can be used to enslave. And right now, language is being used by the cultural engineers to enslave us. And there is a very deliberate and very clear transhumanist agenda. So when it comes to truncating words, where they become more digitized and more the way that computers are using them, I definitely get concerned. And also because every single word is encoded with multiple layers of metadata that are programming us and our collective reality structure on multiple levels. So when certain words are truncated and meanings are changed, it's concerning because we're like, it's a tool of the controllers. So when we're speaking their language for them, a lot of ways that the words have been weaponized now, then we're enslaving ourselves for them. So I think it's a slippery slope. Yes, language is evolving and there's a certain level of surrender that goes along with it, but there's also us being self-responsible in not giving ourselves away to negative coding or enslavement coding that is absolutely coming through the language.
And I think you make a great point there. Is it natural evolution or is it artificial inspired with a narrative behind it? Evolution.
Exactly.
All right. Let's see. TK said the fact that we speak English is not to be overlooked. Sure, language changes, but if you can use it more effectively than others, they can run circles around you mentally. Yes. So wielding English, being able to use it to communicate your ideas and thoughts gives you power because it allows people to understand where you're coming from, give them perspective, and you can reach people, which we try to do. As one of the things I say, we try to speak to reach, not to be right. So thank you, TK, for that. Zudica, artist extraordinaire, is in the house. She speaks through her artwork, but she says Darity, and if people, once again, the fact that she says Darity, she when she's speaking to me or people on the channel that I know who she's speaking about, but she's talking about Sandy Darity, I assume one of the top reparations/atonement professors out of Duke. But just to go to show you that when she used that, most people are like, Darity, who is Darity, right? But now that she knows she's speaking to me, she knew what I knew who she was talking about. But she says Darity has a series about the origins of certain Southern terms back to poor British folks and an observation about how language and the class shapes the dialects and dialects used which perpetuate those assumptions. So I think she's talking about the Southern stereotypes, that kind of thing. So yep. Keep it moving. Thank you, Zudica. Got Carson Way 1. He said algorithms on Beast Mode. I think he's referring to the I don't know if maybe the YouTube algorithm or maybe the Netflix conversation. But thank you, Carson Way 1. Gravy Wagon came back and he said his red string is on the wrong hand.
Ooh, that's interesting.
One, would you like? Second statement was should be on the right wrist. Dude is a poser. So one, just not to gloss over the red string. Would you like to enlighten people on what that is? Because you went straight to it. How you went to look for it? Did you just notice it, or did something inspire you to look at his wrist? Because I even missed that myself.
I just saw it and I noticed there's a lot of signaling that's going on. A lot of what's being said, sure, he's using words, but what are the other signals happening? So the red string is a Kabbalah symbol, which is Jewish mysticism. But, we can't pretend that a lot of what's going on is not the Zionist agenda and this allegiance to Israel that has been like forced upon us where, it's crazy to me that there are laws in this country that you're not allowed to speak lack of Israel. Like what? I'm sorry. Aren't we a democratic nation? So for me, it was just signaling that, but I think that's interesting that it was on the wrong wrist and it was an inversion. And what is the signaling? What is the code there?
Right. And that's the point of, just go briefly back to the third rail, is that we talk about everything on the show, right? I mean, we talk about everything, and the fact that just to explain, because we don't want to assume people know what third rail is third rail is there's the power source on like subways, and it's charged by electricity. So if you touch the third rail of subway, it'll electrocute you and kill you. So that's basically the term there. But why was it that, because you weren't the only one, and I still haven't got any consensus on if Jewish people are white or not, and that kind of thing, because I had people writing and say, yes, yeah, no, I don't want to make the talk about that, but
What does white even mean? Like, white's
right,
not,
and that's the other thing. Right.
it denies people being Irish, being German, being whatever. I mean, it's very bizarre as a Jew. Like, yeah, the color of my skin might not be as melanated as someone, but I can't deny, my family history and being persecuted for my bloodline. And that, that was one of my things about the Third Rail series, is that people aren't differentiating between Jews and the Jewish banking cabal or the Khazarians, right? And so it's weird because I've been in, as a journalist, I've been in the quote unquote truth movement for decades. And it's kind of an underlying thing of like, blame the Jews, blame the Jews, blame the Jews. And I threw out to you, it's like, okay, well, Obama and Beyonce, are part of the globalist agenda. So if I just start saying it's the blacks, that's not really going to go over very well, but people have no problem saying it's the Jews. And it's like, there's a Jewish cabal that's a problem. But, it's weird being lumped in all the time with this like evil satanic blood cult.
And like I said, I think when you walk into that room of the quote unquote, and I'm going to use a word that's so triggering and polarizing, of the Illuminati, when you walk into that room, it's going to be a vast majority of different races of people, even lizards. And I say that in jest, but but I think it's a mind state of the lizard brain of fight or flight, either run or kill kind of thing, and that's how they look at other human beings. So hopefully I didn't give out the vibe of, oh, it's just one group and this kind of thing. And the other weird thing, and Caught in Way 1 brings it up, is, and like I said, I don't want to make that about this, is how can you identify as a religion if you don't believe in the religion? Because it would be strange for a Muslim person to say, no, I'm an atheist, but I'm Muslim. You'd be like, what? So, I mean, you see, like, and the fact that we can't talk about it, I think only feeds into the conspiracies. The silence is what feeds the conspiracies. Like, why can't we talk about it? Why can't we talk about this? Because we had the experience with back in 2020 with quote unquote black people. It's like you see, you can't talk about that. Shut up. And it's like, it started, that's why we had to start using Black Lives Matter Inc. instead of Black Lives Matter and these things, because you start conflating, and that goes to your point of reduction. So just take off from there if you would like.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love that you've differentiated between Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Inc. I think that's key. And I also think it's reductive and naive to say Judaism is a religion. Yes, it is, but there is a culture to it. And there are cultural ways of thinking, cultural ways of holding the body. There aren't a lot of really amazing Jewish athletes. That's not because of religion. That's because there's a culture, there's a bloodline. There is more to it than that. And I agree, like it's a conversation that we would be wise to expand, and which is what you're doing. But I think, I personally don't follow the Jewish religion. And I think it's very clear from just like observing my content and how my mind works and how I gesticulate and how my body is shaped that I'm very clearly a Jew.
Okay. All right. So you're saying it's more of a biological thing?
It's absolutely
first biology first, and then they subscribe to a faith.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Well, see, this is, like I said, we had to have these talks, and this is the point of the show. This is the point of everything I do, is to start peeling back the layers. And when we start doing that, we're going to realize that, as George Carlin brilliantly said, it's a big club and we ain't in it. As we were saying, when we start peeling back these layers, it's going to be like, hey, you're not in it. You thought you were in it. And then we see this with white, because white became very inclusive. But when you start talking to white supremacists, they'll say, oh, Irish is not white, or Italians are not white. It's like, yeah, you affiliated, but you're not, triple OG white, that kind of thing. So,
I think the black-white delineation or brown-white is, again, it's doing humanity a disservice. It's completely reductive. It's not, it's like you talk about ADOS versus Kamala being from Jamaica or India or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not, you can't compare ADOS to like an Egyptian or someone who's from Pakistan. There's going to be a completely different, it's not homogenized. Everyone has their own cultural history and cultural path. And when it comes to white, I don't even know what that means. White is a color. It's not a race. And I find it completely ridiculous as a Jew when people try to lump me into that when my family was killed for being Jews, when I wasn't allowed, into the high school that I wanted to get into because they had already reached their Jew quota. So it's just a weird way of fragmenting the human family that's not really serving anyone except the controllers that want us divided and hating one another so that we're too distracted to come together and, thwart their ridiculousness.
Right. And one last point on this whole conversation about the third rail is that when you dig deep enough, you'll see it's a bunch of Jewish people in Israel that are anti-Zionist. So it's like you lumping them in with the people they're trying to battle against. You see what I'm saying? It's like, it's this weird.
Yeah.
It's like, just like with me, they'll call me divisive because I want to have my own identity. And it's not based off of genetics. It's based off of political purposes to say that I'm ADOS/FBA, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, no, this is political, which we all know or should know that race is a social construct. Now we even go as far as whiteness is a political construct, because the whole point was one thing could disqualify you from these set rights. You know what I'm saying? Like one drop could disqualify you. So, like I said, we don't want to belabor the point, but just the point we're having this conversation is the fruit of what we're trying to do here. Now we get to go back to the, I think it's called Azov. Is that how you pronounce it? The Azov Battalion. And we have CNN saying a far-right battalion has a key role in Ukraine's resistance. Its neo-Nazi history has been exploited by Putin. You want to make sense of that? Because like you're the propaganda expert, and I thought that headline makes my head spin.
Completely. Far right, but so they're trying to make it seem like the evil far right is actually doing something good.
I haven't made sense of it yet. And for people, I'll drop the link to the article.
I mean,
I can't make sense of this headline.
It's such an irresponsible headline. Like, this shouldn't even be a mainstream news headline. The fact that they're naming this far right exploited, like, that's editorialization. Like, CNN, shame on you. Are you an opinion rag or are you a news source? It's really hard for me to track. I have a lot of resistance to tracking the Ukraine propaganda because it's such an obvious psyop based on so many lies.
Right. And the other thing is that you notice that even on, say, Fox News, you have the Tucker Carlson camp, which is like, hey, we don't want anything to do with this. And follow right after that is Sean Hannity. That's like a neocon pro-war guy. And it's like, it's fascinating that when you watch these, and even though, just go back to the Democratic side, you have a lot of pro-war people. And then you have a lot of another group that says, no, I what we're doing is, we shouldn't be in this war. When you get to even, I think AOC had strange bedfellows of saying, no, I don't think we need to be in this Russia thing. So it's just it's very fascinating what it is. So we see, and normally CNN and MSNBC are on the same side, because they're normally on the same side politically.
Right.
But I have this clip here from Mehdi, and he's going to talk about the Azov battalion. And just, I want you to juxtapose this to what you can see here. Let's just go through a couple of points here. just so we can, really deep dive into it. It says, and it goes, the article for CNN goes on saying, effective fighting force that very much involved in the current conflict. The battalion has a history of neo-Nazi leanings. That's another one of those words, leanings.
Right. What
it's
does
like,
that mean?
It's like they just stick their toe into it.
Right.
It's like, let me just stick my big toe into the little neo-Nazi thing here.
It's like one person in the group watched one Steven, whatever his last name is, video, and now they have like neo-Nazi leanings. They use such vague, broad terms to attempt to marginalize and demonize people, but it takes all the oomph out of what these words really mean.
Mm-hmm. And then going on, it says, in its heyday, so that was the past.
Right. What was that? 100?
They've overcome, they were neo-Nazi leaning in their past.
Right.
And the reason why I'm doing this as a live exercise, and maybe you could give us some pointers of what you would do with your class if you were going over this article with them as a piece of propaganda. Just stop me anytime. But when I see heyday leanings, that kind of thing, I'm like, oh, okay, you're trying to soften the blow here. It's in its heyday, because this is how they talk about the Democratic Party. It was like, yeah, they were, they were pro-slavery in their heyday. You know what I'm saying? They had slavery leanings in their heyday, that kind of thing. So I'm super sensitive to.
CNN teams in the area at the time reported Azov's embrace of neo-Nazi. Like, look how far away from Azov embraced neo-Nazi emblems and paraphernalia, how they took like 12 steps away from it. CNN teams in the area at the time, like all of that kind of jumbles the brain. So it doesn't really land hard that they were using neo-Nazi emblems as their insignias, right? Like, it's already taken us so far away that the truth of it doesn't actually land because of all the word salad that got placed before it.
Okay, continue on. Break it down. I'm gonna step back. You're the subject matter expert. Continue on, as you would do with your class, because we're getting a master class here, folks. And remember, this is a value for value platform. How do you value a master class from an expert author on propaganda? Continue on though.
Well, it's all this vagary in terms of was associated with white supremacists. Like a claim like that deserves some unpacking. Were they actually part of they keep saying was associated with white supremacists and associated with ideology and insignia. So why don't you just put it out? Like, did they have swastikas on their uniforms? Were they using swastikas as their logos? Like, they're just talking around it, but they're not telling us what really happened because they don't want to, because they clearly have an agenda. Like, that's the biggest piece, is that like this is so heavily editorialized. They're not like straight up reporting facts. They're kind of dancing around them and hinting at them because they're pushing an agenda, which is this like pro-Ukraine devotion.
Okay, before you get to the last paragraph, I'm going to ask you this. What inspiration do you get from the image that they used? I'm going to see if you get the same one I got.
I don't get anything from it. It's definitely, it seems like whoever chose the art didn't read the article, because given how many mentions they've made of these vague associations with neo-Nazi insignia, you would think that neo-Nazi insignia would be front and center of the image.
What I took away from this, and this may be a Space Jam reach, is this reminded me of the tiki torches in Charlottesville. So it's like, yeah, they're kind of like our far right. They not real Nazis.
Well, and this also speaks to what you were talking about in the beginning in terms of memes, of how the combination of images and words has such an effect, and how this image completely softens, along with the, vague languaging, the truth of the matter.
I agree with you. So let's get into that last paragraph here. You want to go ahead and just break it down for us, as only you can do?
Thanks, Mo. Well, again, they have this was associated with, like, break down what was the association? Did they have white supremacist members? Were they working in tandem with them? Like, associated is so vague. And this also goes back to the PolitiFact quote unquote debunking of deliberately lying. Like this article is a perfect example. There are no deliberate lies, but they're really dancing around the truth in a big way.
Hold on, let's take people back there, just so for the people that's coming in late. What you're referring to, you're talking about the PolitiFact, which slide was that? I think 13, I believe. Here it is. Purposely lie.
Yep.
So they've danced around it. They're not purposely lying. They're being intentionally vague, but they're not purposely lying. And you jumped over something that jumped out at me. They use in its heyday. They've
As though
used
it's not happening now.
Huh?
As though it's not happening now.
Right, but they've used that twice. No, excuse me, I snagged the same thing twice, excuse me. But yeah, in its heyday, and like you said, they distanced themselves. And it says once they put the years in there. Go ahead.
Is it relevant now or is it not relevant now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's deliberately opaque. And then you have, and again, we've already gone over this, of this, like, it's like however many words you place in front of the actual truth is how much you're trying to avoid it. Like, let's say, Mo, you were trying to give up caffeine, right? And you said to me, I'm working on trying to give up caffeine. Right. I would be so on you, because what you're telling me is you're not giving up caffeine because of how many words you've put in front of it. I'm trying to work on this thing that I'm not really doing, right? So you throw all these words in front to kind of distract, and that's what they're doing here. CNN.
Can I try that? Can we do a live exercise? Because I try to give up caffeine, so I would say I'm really focusing on actively beginning the process of separating myself from my addiction with caffeine.
Yeah, so what you're telling me is that you're sticking with your addiction to caffeine, but you're lying to yourself.
I had coffee this morning, is what I said.
Exactly. And that's what's going on here. CNN teams in the area at the time reported. So all of that is to take away from the fact that Azov is embracing neo-Nazi emblems and paraphernalia.
Yes. So let's get into how MSNBC. Now we got CNN. They acknowledge that they have a key role in Ukraine's resistance, right?
Yep.
Let's hear who we assume is on the same side of the spectrum politically as CNN, MSNBC. All right. And you can stop me anytime in this clip if you hear anything that you want to pounce on, okay?
Okay.
All right. Fair use.
In Vladimir Putin's rambling war declaration on Thursday morning, he threw everything at the wall in hopes.
All right. Yeah. Hold on. How far do we get? We're like 9 seconds in. 9 seconds in, propaganda all right off the top.
Vladimir Putin's rambling war declaration. That is so sloppy. This reporter's opinion of whether Putin's declaration was rambling or not is completely irrelevant and unprofessional and bad, unethical journalism. Okay.
All right, and Iggy, if we're only 9 seconds in, we're going to need some coffee. Because this is a roughly 2 minute clip. And if it's thick like that. So let's continue on.
Something might stick. He didn't just cite the Iraq War, the Balkans, the US intervention in Syria. He didn't just perform his usual rewriting of history claiming Ukrainian land.
What'd you say?
His tone of voice. Like, remember back in the day, like Walter Cronkite or Christine Anna-Pamor, and they would deliver the news from a neutral space, which is the actual job of the journalist. His intonation, his mockery, this is absurd.
And it's sassy. He's very sassy. Very sassy when he comes across. And this is this new thing Are you doing a opinion op-ed or what? I mean, what is this?
Exactly.
All right, so let's continue on.
And is Russian land. He also said this, and I quote, "We will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine." Later, he addressed Ukrainian soldiers directly, saying, quote, "Your fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers did not fight the Nazi occupiers and did not defend our common motherland to allow today's neo-Nazis to seize power in Ukraine." All of which seems awfully weird since Ukraine is not a Nazi country. So what in the world is...
Excuse me. First of all, awfully weird. Like, is this a 13-year-old? This is how you're going to describe the news? Awfully weird. His opinion is irrelevant. And then for him to make these claims about whether Ukraine is a Nazi, like, he's just so out of line with his debunking.
Okay, so to be fair, because I mean that's what we like to do around here. You know, on the other side of the binary, Pootie Tang, why did he? What do you think his reasoning behind using the Dnazify meme?
Well, again, and just to be clear, I haven't been to Ukraine, so I don't know anything about it. And this is exactly what you talked about at the beginning of our show of I don't believe anything coming out of mainstream media's mouth. It would have been helpful if they'd pressed Putin, if they'd interviewed him, if they'd asked him to explain what that means. I don't actually know what the Nazi situation is in Ukraine.
No, I'm not. I don't want you to get to the facts. I'm saying from a analysis of a propaganda. What
I mean, it makes it seem like his mission there is super noble because of some Nazi problem.
Okay,
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, but it brought the. I mean, I think just from the score of propagandists, I think it was smart to do this because now you have to have these people defending Nazis.
Exactly. And it goes back to the coding embedded in these words, especially these iconic words. Like you pull Nazi out, like that's going to rile people up. And that's any good propaganda is going to generate a huge emotional reaction. So if that's how Putin is framing his mission there, then yeah, that's massive propaganda to speak in such sweeping emotionally loaded terms.
Okay, let's continue on.
Okay.
Vladimir Putin going on about? Well, it's part of a Russian propaganda narrative, one that's long found currency among the American far right and parts of the far left.
Wait.
Go ahead.
To demonize it as a propaganda, like I'm curious to know if he's going to back it up. But again, and we see this going on so hardcore, to aim it to the far right, and then he throws them a bone, and even the far left, like that right there is that consistent polarization programming that's coming through the American media that's doing us such a disservice. Like just speak to the people, just speak to the, like for him to make that differentiation that they're speaking to the far right, very sloppy, very damaging to the country.
And this is why I give Pootie Tang points, because he lobbed something up there, a piece of propaganda that could get the far left or the far left, the American far left and the American far right to agree on something, which is a very fast. I mean, just from the propagandistic standpoint, that was a beautiful,
clever
thing. Very clever.
If he weren't demonized the way he's been.
Right. So let's continue on.
In bad faith, but one that almost a decade ago held a sliver of truth. It started in 2014 when...
Sliver. That's what we were talking about before, how they prefaced the word lie, truth with these...
His face when delivering the line.
Yeah, let's go back and see that one more time. All right.
Yeah, watch his face. It's an actor. It's not a journalist.
Okay, here we go.
A sliver of truth. It started in 2014 when Ukrainian demonstrators forced the Russian-aligned president Viktor Yanukovych to flee the country.
Forced?
Hold on, let me back up here, cause we got a non-verbal cue expert in the house, and I just want to do something right quick. Grump, if you're watching and still listening, please put in the live chat. When he looked away to his right, my left. No, his right, yeah. His left, my right, I believe. This side eye look away. What is that, Grump, if you're still here? Let's continue on while I see what Grump has to say.
A sliver of truth.
Go back
it started in 20...
for a second. Oh, just go back like 1 or 2 more seconds so we could see the full look.
Okay, here we go. He's looking straight ahead, and then
Yeah.
he's going to do this weird look off to the side and then go into the sliver of truth.
decade ago held a sliver of truth. It started in 2014 when Ukrainian demonstrators forced the Russian-aligned president, Viktor Yanukovych, to flee the country. Putin responded by invading and backing Russian separatists across Ukraine. And in the fighting, far-right fringe militias joined other Ukrainian elements to defend their homeland. Chief among them was the Azov Battalion, a paramilitary formed by, yes, neo-Nazis. But other far-right groups came and went too, with names like Right Sector, Patriot of Ukraine, and White Hammer. Few made much of an impact on the fighting or on Ukrainian society. But even back then, Putin was falsely claiming that the neo-Nazi groups ran Ukraine. Never mind the fact that in Ukraine's most recent election in 2019, the country's ultra-nationalist far-right coalition gained just over 2% of the vote and 0 seats in parliament.
Hold up.
These guys...
Go ahead.
Just that. Go back to that headline.
Okay.
The Haaretz, the far right, got humiliated. Like that, again, that's not journalism. Did they win the election? Did they lose the election? Maybe they lost the election because they only got 2%. But that leap to just got humiliated, totally not okay.
And Putin wasn't leaving. Putin wasn't limited his scope to this most recent iterations of the Nazis. He said your fathers, your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers. You know what I'm saying? He's saying this is an issue embedded in the whole Ukrainian culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. See, I know Grunt was he's going to come through. He said it's an unconscious gesture we tend to do before we put emphasis on something to persuade people to look at it from our point of view. Thank you, Grunt.
Yep.
just over 2% of the vote and 0 seats in parliament. These guys don't run anything in Ukraine, with one notable exception. The Azov Battalion still enjoys status as a National Guard unit, one that US and Canadian militaries refuse to work with when they're training Ukrainian troops.
So now he said they don't run anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the MSNBC, one of their talking lines, or talking points. But let's go back to the CNN article. A far-right battalion has a key role in the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's saying they don't run anything politically, but the way he framed it said they don't run anything. That's a very, for somebody that is paid to, master the English language.
Yep.
That was very reductive, right? To say they don't run anything.
Completely. It's, yes, extremely reductive. And they're not like walking us through it. Like all of they're telling us what to think and what not to think, but they're not laying down the facts that would allow us to make the assessments for ourselves. Like, okay, so what do they do? If they don't run anything politically, what is their role? Where do they have influence? What are their intentions?
All right, let's get back to the clip.
In fact, you may have seen them recently in viral photos showing Azov soldiers training regular Ukrainians, including a grandmother, for possible insurgency fighting against Russian invaders. The vast majority of Ukrainians have little in common with Azov's extremists, but with the constant threat of Russian invasion, they don't mind the hell. That's according to Michael Colborn, a Bellingcat researcher who literally wrote the book on Azov. This week he told the Israeli paper Haaretz that if you ask Ukrainians what do they think of Azov's politics, or mention that they are far-right extremists, many people will say, I don't really care about that. I don't share those views. I'm more interested in what they can do to defend Ukraine.
Okay, stop. So the way that was framed, if you ask them, and they gave us one quote. So he asked a person this quote, but now that has been reframed as the Ukrainian people?
It's the consensus.
Right.
We're going to take one quote and let it be the consent. But we've seen this with the trucker rallies, right?
Yep.
You have, and this is what boggles the mind. And I have to really ask, is the purpose of it to make us go crazy? Because at the same time as he's doing this spiel, they see one Confederate flag at a rally, or they see, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not taking over anybody. I'm just saying the disingenuous nature of the media. that they see one Confederate flag at a rally and they say, oh, it's a Confederate rally or a Nazi rally or a white supremacist rally. Or you go to Canada and you see one Nazi flag, and we don't even know if that was a plant or what, but they'll have one picture. But then we have a whole battalion who's represented by the swastika on their flag. And they're like, oh, no. They're not the neo-Nazi leaning in their heyday.
Exactly. And also notice in this, there's not one interview with any Ukrainian people whatsoever, which again, super horrible journalism. It's just one dude with a very expressive face and clearly a bunch of acting training telling us what to think. He mentions this one guy who literally wrote the book on Ukraine. Well, is he a scholar? Did he have an angle on the book? Was there an agenda behind the book? Like the book. What was the book about? I'm sure there are many books. How about some actual reporting?
And he dropped Bellingcat. That's another nod to whoever the audience that he's speaking to.
Yep.
It's like, oh, he's a Bellingcat, yeah. But like you said, what you've noticed, like we have stopped on the screen, he's very expressive. Yep. It's not that deadpan news delivery of yesteryear. And don't let it be lost on the viewers that they chose a brown person.
Yep, with an English accent, because anyone reporting on Ukraine has to be from England these days.
Yes. So all right, we got a few more seconds of this clip and then we can wrap up.
It's disconcerting, but also on some level understandable. If there were a foreign state invasion of the American mainland, a lot of armed US liberals might suddenly find themselves shoulder to shoulder with Proud Boys on the rampart.
Are you kidding me? Who is he to tell us?
You first, ladies first. Ladies first, go ahead.
It's just not his job to tell us what's understandable or what isn't. It's his job to present the facts from both sides and let his audience make up their minds for themselves. And this mention of the Proud Boys and liberals, he didn't say liberals and conservatives, right? He said liberals, neutral, still polarized, and then Proud Boys, you go to racists. Again, all of this programming.
And I have to say, the fact that, or if you're not pro-Democratic Party as a black person, so-called black person in America, you've been called all kind of nasty names.
Yep.
Skin folk, you're saying, I would say all skin folk ain't kin folk. You're a coon. You're this, you're that.
According to our president, you ain't black.
Right, you're not black. but if you say, okay, and the whole point is these people say, that, something's fishy going on. It seems like there's not say all, but some people are saying there's some kind of cabal, that's trying to, take over the U.S. and I'm siding with them. So from his logic, that should be acceptable. If that's your logic and your decision tree to say, hey, there's this weird, global cabal is trying to take over America. So I'm going to side with people that may not agree with to stop this cabal. It should be justified, right?
Yep.
Through his logic.
Exactly.
But it's not. You're called all kind of nasty names, and it's accepted. Which, just as a quick aside, and I would like to just like a quick 2-minute comment on this with Kanye. Kanye was actually banned from Instagram for a day and then banned for the Grammys for calling Trevor Noah, who is another so-called quote-unquote black person, which we don't even know what that term means anymore, for calling him a coon when you could go all over, and I put it on my social media, hashtag Coonye, spelled with coon and EY at the end, is a hashtag. But you suspend Kanye for calling Trevor Noah one.
Whoa. Well, we all know what's going on with Kanye. He made the mistake of supporting 45. He went out of his lane. He's thinking for himself that he hasn't sworn his allegiance to the Democratic Party.
But that's why I brought this up, because that's a perfect example of what I'm saying. Through Kanye's logic, he feels like there's some kind of cabal that's dangerous to Americans and in that black people as well. And he's siding with, say, a 45 Savage. and they lambasted him, but they changed the rules here.
Yep. Well, the rule, I mean, there's no consistency in cancel culture at all. The only consistency is if you speak out against the dominant narrative and the globalists, then you're going to get canceled. And they could change the rules as much as they want.
Okay, so I'm going to back this up just so people can hear what he said again. So what we were talking about, how you can see the hypocrisy here.
Or mention that they are far-right extremists. Many people will say, I don't really care about that. I don't share those views. I'm more interested in what they can do to defend Ukraine. That's disconcerting, but also on some level, understandable.
Disconcerting. Hello?
Yeah, no, I know. It's like he's trying to like validate his obviously he's trying to validate his agenda by tossing in the disconcerting, right? Like he's throwing a bone to neutrality, but then he's jumping back in to defend it. It's like an attempt to make it seem like he's doing journalism and not straight up propaganda.
All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up.
If there were a foreign state invasion of the American mainland, a lot of armed US liberals might suddenly find themselves shoulder to shoulder with Proud Boys on the ramparts.
Ugh. It ended on Proud Boys, not Republicans, not conservatives. Proud
And
Boys.
in all fairness, that's not where the clip ended, but then he did a pivot to go on to some other other points about them. But I have here Your Asian Times. Ukraine uses pig fat bullets to deflate Russian aggression while Moscow determined to denazify Kiev, remove Zelensky. And this is actually on Twitter. Can you read the screen? Can you read what the Twitter warning says?
This tweet violated the Twitter rules about hateful conduct. However, Twitter has determined that it may be in the public's interest for the tweet. What? Whoa. I don't even understand what's hateful. I don't get it.
Oh, no, I'm going to explain to you why. So in this clip, I'm not going to play this clip because I'm not getting banned from YouTube.
Okay.
Because this might be okay on Twitter for Ukrainians, but as a black man on Twitter or YouTube, this might get me canceled. So what they're saying is, yeah, this could be hateful that they're trying to send Russian Muslims to hell for having pig fat, being shot with a pig fat covered bullet. But it's in the greater good. So we're going to keep this up here. So in this clip, what happens is you have Ukrainian soldiers showing how to lace your bullets with pig fat, which if a Muslim person is shot by this, from their religious view, they won't go to heaven.
Okay. And now Twitter's at the point, it's very challenging to keep up with Twitter's thought policing and First Amendment decimating. So now they don't report hateful conduct. It can be true, but you're not allowed to talk about it. But in this case, you can.
It says, however, they understand that it's hateful conduct and what's weird is the left or Democrats are pro-Muslim.
Right.
Or anti-Islamophobic, right? So the fact that you don't not only want to kill somebody on this plane of existence, but you want to ban them from heaven. That is the wildest thing. And I'm not going to play this, but if you go to the link, the Euro Asian Times, they have the link to the tweet that's still up right now. What? And it says, Azov fighters of the National Guard greased the bullets with lard, which is pork, against the I don't know how to pronounce that, Kadyrov orcs, which is Russian Muslims.
Do you think that's really happening?
It's in the video, and like I said, I don't know if this is I'm assuming that it's real, but what's weird to me is Twitter's like, oh yeah, that's good. It's like they were saying, oh, yeah, you can say you can kill Russians. That's fine on Facebook. And this is a blue check. This is a blue check.
That's insane. That's insane. But also keep in mind that Twitter had no problem with kill all men.
Not at all.
That's A-okay, fair game. That type of call for killing half the planet.
And this is where it hits home at. We have this YouTube content creator, and I use that term very loosely, and I'm not going to even mention her name. They said, oh, yeah, you might want to considering aborting black boys.
What?
Yes. And please, people, don't type her name in the live chat. I don't want to give her any, but yes, this is where we're at.
Oh, man.
Yeah, we might want to consider, you know what I'm saying, aborting black boys. Yeah, that might be the solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think Gates is on top of that with his population control plans.
Right. I mean, that's that innate. I don't know if that person's willing or unwilling, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get to the final comments. Now I'll let you wrap up, promote, you're saying your book, your classes. Iggy says, yeah, they need to be more fear factor here. Got to make more reasons for American citizens to be enemies. Yep, that goes back to the whole T word and how they're trying to use that as a blanket statement. He ain't gonna say, he said, look up the word literally. And this is one of those words they like to load.
Yep.
Which people say literally, and it's not literally. We said, look up the word literally in the Webster's. They have it meaning the exact opposite of what it is as one of the definitions. Okay.
Webster's dictionary has been so co-opted. It's really shocking to look up a lot of the definitions.
I would suggest to people.
I teach my students to look in multiple dictionaries so they can learn how the propaganda is working. In my studies, Cambridge is the least co-opted, but I recommend people figure it out for themselves.
What I recommend to people, because I have several around the house, is go to used bookstores and buy as many old dictionaries as possible.
Exactly. Old, and especially the off-brand ones.
Yes.
Like right now I'm using one from the 70s called Synonym Finder as a thesaurus, and it's the best that I've found. But I agree, buy old ones and hold on to them.
Yeah, you can't protect it from Mandela effect. I know people out there like, but Mandela effect. No, but I say that in jest, but this is where physical is gonna make a comeback.
Yes.
So Jack State says divide and conquer. I agree with that. Carlton Way 1 said these folks are masters of confusion. And as I always say that I got from Neely Fuller is don't be confused that they're confused. This confusion they're causing is not out of ignorance.
Oh, no.
Not out of understanding. This is intentional confusion.
Yep.
He said, going to say Jewish is a religion, point blank period. I bet the white Jews would laugh at black person claiming they were Jewish. So I have to ask this question. I mean, not that I would never want you to put you in a position because I hate being put in that position as well. But you went on to say about it being a biological. What about the people that's?
I mean, there are plenty of Jews in Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That yes.
Yeah, like that's.
Okay.
Are you going to tell Ethiopians that they're not Jewish?
Yeah, so that goes with the biology thing. So, like I said, we don't want to rehash that, but thank you for the comment. Salvage from, I think that's New Mexico. The Azov Battalion is essentially the new ISIS, Afghan 2.0. And that was weird too, because we were fighting ISIS at the same time we were funding ISIS. So
I'm wondering, are we funding Azov Battalion as well?
I mean, we have to be if we're funding Ukraine.
Pretty much. And I mean, let's keep in mind what Ukraine really is and what their roots are. The Rothschilds are Ukraine. The Rothschilds.
See, you can't talk like that because you'll be labeled as an anti-Semite when you bring up that word.
So annoying to me.
Right? You know what I'm saying? Like you notice in the third, I didn't bring up any of the terms you're saying, just not out of. It was intentional, so I could get people not to have that reflex.
I get it, and I respect it, and I think it allowed you to track more ground. But in terms of what's going on in Ukraine right now, like unless we're going to talk about Khazaria and the Rothschilds and that whole thing, then we're not really talking about what's going on.
True, and that's what I'm saying. But you have to. I found this with truth, period, and I talk about this as the merry-go-round of truth. That if you have it going so fast, let me give you the analogy. You know how I used to go to the playground and the big kids have the merry-go-round and they would have it going so fast you never could jump on? Or if you were trapped on there, you could never jump off?
Yes.
I'm a believer of if you want to get people into truth or examining truth, not your perception of truth, but just examining and searching for truth, we have to slow the merry-go-round down so they can get on. Because if not, they're just going to be standing on the sideline watching as we spin this thing around and around and around, going deeper and deeper down rabbit holes that they can't even grasp what we're trying to say.
Yeah, I think it's one of your superpowers, Mo. You're very strategic and methodical in your pacing of how you disseminate the information. And I think it's one of the reasons why you're so great at what you do, for sure.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to put an image on the screen of, this is the Azov military. And you see the clear swastikas and
but CNN
hand gestures and things of that nature.
CNN and MSNBC just couldn't find these.
Yeah, they went. Like I said, they went with the tiki torch look.
Right.
So, okay, Carlton Way 1 is. He said, I wonder will the 100,000 Ukrainians coming here will get jobs as police officers? We as black people better watch out. And I'll ask this, and I've made the statement: is this an example of Operation Paperclip 2.0? I mean, they're not bringing janitors and people like that here. When they say refugees, they're not bringing low class, unintelligent people here. This is how they get the intelligentsia and the scientists and these things out of the country, as we've seen in Nazi Germany after World War II.
That's a really good point. That's a good point.
All right, so thank you, Carlton Way 1 for that. Iggy says, nice subliminal message, must have stock in caffeine. No, and then we don't take any conflict bean money here. We're funded by the people. And remind people once again, this is a value for value platform. Also, Dani, if people want to contribute to you other than your book, do you have a Cash App, PayPal, anything where people can show value for value?
I have a tip jar option on my website for PayPal. I have a Patreon. And I also just started a locals community, which is the only place now where I'm putting like my spicier videos that can't go on YouTube. So people can join me on locals to see all my stuff, and they can become paid supporters or Patreon or PayPal. And if you prefer Venmo, then just send me a message and I'm happy to receive that way too.
And I'll put your website, just make sure that's the right one, DaniKatz.com, right? Is that where they can find you?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll put it in the live chat for people that listen to the playback or currently live now. You can find her website there. One last star comment was a stimulated student. It said, Biden never said you not black if you don't vote for him. It was interpreted that way, which I think is exactly what he wanted. That's why language integrity is so important. All right, thank you for that. Let's go to the final comments. Oh, we got Theodore in the house, always with the purple and gold star hearts. Shay's here in the house. All right, good to see there. I was literally talking to my son a few days ago about the definitions changing. Yes, and once again, I would suggest to people go buy old dictionaries.
Yep.
They're very cheap. I mean, you can find them for like a couple of bucks. Maybe get one or two from every 80s, 90s, wherever you can find them. Because they're going to be worth their weight in gold one day, huh?
The older, the better. And
the older, the better, yes.
You see them, just get them. Just be the custodians for humanity.
Yep. And that's what Michael Lampale said. He said he has a bunch. He has lots of them. You might want to open up a Amazon store. You might be sitting on a gold mine there.
Oh, good idea.
Enzi Pretty said they call themselves Ashkenazi Jews, not Hebrews. It's a big difference. Thank you. I think we covered that. Face to the screen said great analogy. Let me see. Make sure we get all the facts, family. And I appreciate everybody coming out this Sunday afternoon. We're going to start ramping up the converse again. It's just shifting from product to product. I shifted some attention over to the moments. Those are the more reactionary, real-time, less deep diving and more popular opinion or snap reaction kind of thing. So we're balancing out here. I got a lot of products going here, you know what I'm saying, just to meet, every type of viewer that I have. Kobe says, they getting all the people that was working in the biolabs. That's Operation Paperclip 2.0 that I was referring to. And NZ says there's a lot of NATO flags, however, no American flag or EU makes you wonder, has NATO been opted by the Nazis? So, all right, thank you for everybody. And Dani, once again, let me put your website and where people can find you and your 2 books, also your classes. Any last words?
It was so fun to drop in with you, Mo. I'm honored that I got to come on a 3rd time. I also have space on my roster for new coaching clients. If anyone is down for empowered badassery coaching, and my new program is the Language of Healing. I'm working with people who've been diagnosed with cancer, other chronic and degenerative illnesses, on reprogramming their body for health and healing with language. And thanks again for having me, Mo.
Just I want you to promote that coaching once again. What if I was to sign up? What would just give me maybe one thing that you would coach me on, not in detail, but
coaching you on becoming like where you're getting in your own way, where you're playing small, how to be your most authentic, empowered self, and claim your sovereign authority in this lifetime to create your world as you want to.
Thank you for that very much. Thank you for joining me. You got the hat trick of Converse. And we definitely, you know how this goes. If you find something you want to talk about, you hit me up, and then we'll get it on the schedule and we'll do it again. I'd like to thank Facts Family once again for coming out on this Sunday afternoon. Just one last time to remind people that we are a value for value platform. This is supported by the Facts Family and all the contributors and producers and Facts Family members. And with that said, pay attention to everything and the truth will reveal itself. You all have a great afternoon.
2, 3.
Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can be it, you can be it, you can be it. You can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can be it, you can be it, you can be it. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. Elevate your mind. It's the high-end theory. The high-end theory. It's the high-end theory. The high-end theory. I remember when I told myself I'ma do this one day. Held on to my dreams really tight and never let them